Welcome to The Real You Show. In our previous episodes, we constantly talked about the show being of service to humankind. And so what better way to give back to the community than by inviting someone to our studio who is not only of service to people, but contributes to the transformative journey of empowering the leaders of today, enabling them to find their ultimate success in their professional and personal lives. My next guest has been in the fast-paced corporate tech space for almost 2 decades. Little did she know that 12 years into her corporate career, she discovered her own true calling. What that calling was and how she managed to turn her calling into a passionate business, we will let you guys find out throughout this episode. She is a UC Berkeley certified leadership coach, and I am truly inspired, really honored, and so excited to welcome her to our studio today and giving her the space to elaborate more on how she has transformed various C-level executive leaders in the corporate landscape of today. Allow me to welcome Diana Dow. Hi, Diana.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much for coming here and for joining the episode and for being here at The Real You Show. So in the introduction, as you may have heard, obviously, we talked about you being in the corporate tech space for 2 decades. And then essentially, you ended up finding your own true calling. So I'm going to start with this. Allow me to ask you, what made you choose the executive leadership coaching space?
So first of all, thank you for having me here in this beautiful studio, really, today.
It's a pleasure.
And to answer this question, I have to take you way back. So as you said, I've been in the corporate tech space for almost 20 years, 18 years to be exact.
Right.
And in the first 12 years of my corporate experience, I was really exposed to what I would consider today not the best leadership or sort of leadership experiences or bosses that I had around me.
Wow.
And it took me a really long time to find what I finally found 12 years later. But during that period, what I realized is that I came across a lot of experience of unjust leadership,
Right.
leadership that was just, it didn't feel right. And I couldn't point my finger on what was wrong. And I didn't have the tools or the ability to articulate what was it that I felt, that I observed that wasn't right about sort of the leadership styles that I had around me.
Right.
And then fast forward up until only 6 years ago, I came across my now ex-manager, wonderful person, who was my first sort of female leader in my life. And she really introduced me to the world of coaching.
Right.
She was a life coach, not an executive coach, but those two are very intertwined. And I learned a lot. And really through her is when I realized, you know what? The first 12 years of my corporate experience, I wasn't bringing my full authentic self into the workplace.
Right.
And I realized that I was behaving, showing up, acting, performing, in my role in a way where I was probably showing up in a way that was expected of me.
Right.
And I left a lot of who I really am at home.
Right.
And during that period, I also became a mom of 2 boys. And it's really sad to say now when I think back is that there was a period in my life after I became a mother, when I came back to the workplace, when I realized that I was hiding the fact that I'm a mom.
Wow.
And I still remember showing up to work. And so, my children were very young during that time. And I realized that when I would have to check in on them or, when I would get a phone call from the house, I would step out of the office because I was in a very male-dominated environment.
Right, which we're going to touch upon as well today.
Yes.
I love that you're saying that, right?
And it's horrible thinking back that I was doing that. And so I picked up on a lot of these leadership traits back in the day. And I thought, you know what? There's something that's not right about these traits. And I'm going to have to, when I have the opportunity to change that. And I thought, you know what? Everything that I saw as what I consider bad leadership, I'm going to be the opposite of that. And so I'm going to build my leadership brand around what I believe good leadership should be. As long as the leader has the ability or the willingness to change and has someone around them who can bring awareness to them of what is it that they're not doing right in their leadership role.
Right.
Then, change can happen. Change can definitely happen. So, and the responsibility of a leader is, and this is really where I think so many leaders go wrong today, is really truly to to get out of your head. And it is a privilege to be a leader.
Right.
It's a privilege to
That's
be in
beautiful.
that position.
Right.
Right. But more than a privilege, it's a responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's a duty.
Right.
Because you're in a position where the responsibility really relies on you, on growing your team around you and the people that rely on you. And so you have to really, and in the world of coaching, we call that lowering your self-orientation. You have to lower your self-orientation and really look at, I'm here to serve the team around me and really to allow them to reach their full potential.
That is so beautiful, because a lot of leaders, and I always say that, throughout the episodes, is I don't want to generalize, but I always use examples of, my surrounding and people I know, that there are a lot of leaders that we may know of, we may not have necessarily worked with them, or we have worked with them, but we've observed how they make it less about the people, but more about themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So where does someone like Diana, as an executive leadership coach, come in? And how do you turn that around?
There's so many different forms or modalities to approach that, because there's no one formula.
Right.
There's no one formula. And so you could be working with, when we talk about leadership, we're talking about people that are already successful.
Exactly.
They're in that leadership role. They have a track record, and clearly, what their experience and their success has brought them there.
Right.
But you can be successful and still have opportunity to get better, right? To be more aware of some of the soft skills that you might require, right? To really pay attention to what's happening around you. And there's so many different forms of coaching. We look at really performance, soft skills, communication skills, presentation skills, interpersonal skills, very, very important.
Right.
And it can be a tactical problem, or it can be really a bigger strategic problem that we can coach through. Anything can be brought into a coaching session, anything. And I always say it, and I say it to my team as well every day in my corporate job, is that when you have senior leadership in front of you, you have to remember they're humans too.
Right. I was going to get to that. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I always say, when you show up to work, you don't leave your heart at home.
Right.
You come with your heart to the office.
Right.
And so relationships nowadays, especially with leaders that have been in their leadership role for a very long time, they're very busy. They have a lot of responsibilities. A lot is at stake for them. They're under a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. And so there is a reason why they behave in the way that they behave, and in them probably not having the ability to pause and work through some of their struggles and challenges. So It really is helpful to create that space for a leader today and be like, you know what, this is a safe space for you to come and talk to me about what you're struggling with.
Right.
Because anyone in the workplace today, whether anyone really who is actively in the workspace today, is working through something.
Right.
It can be you wanting to prepare for a leadership meeting, for a team meeting. It can be you facing certain, challenges with team members on the team. You want to coach your team towards performance. You have certain conflicts that you want to work through. It can be anything. So it can be really something tactical that you need to work through for the coming week.
Right.
Or something a lot bigger where you really need help for someone to create that space for you to work towards a vision.
Right. As a leadership coach, I'm sure you must have dealt or even heard of leaders, not necessarily males, but we are in a male-dominated world, but we'll put that aside. But males and females in a leadership world that come to you and really want to work through on how to become better leaders. Mm. What do you do with the concept of ego, and how does that kick in?
It's a very good question. So I have coached, or I've had the privilege to coach many different kinds of personalities, so across the globe really, and across continents and different markets. And when you have someone coming into a coaching session who is higher on the ego side, right? You can spot that very easily. And I've had situations where I've had to coach someone who didn't want to be there, but they were asked to be there by their board, for example. Others who are there by choice because they are aware that they want to work towards something very specific.
Right.
And so when it comes to ego, the most important thing is, first of all, is to create a space that is really psychologically safe and of no judgment.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Right.
So really have this person, because if you think about it, a coaching session happens in a one-to-one setting.
Right.
Right. And I always set the ground rules and let this person know that whatever is shared with me in the coaching session is not going to go outside the session.
Of course.
Right. And so it's going to stay between us, and really to make this person feel very comfortable. Because what I often see with leaders, what happens with them is that the higher they are up in the rank, and you can be in a leadership position for 10, 20 years, the less accessible you become, the less authentic you become.
Absolutely.
Because you start creating this, almost this sort of boundary around you of, because you're so busy. Right. And so it's understandable that you create that, because you cannot be at all times highly accessible to everybody. The world of executive coaching is so valuable, because that is an opportunity for a leader in the workspace, in the corporate space. You can be an entrepreneur as well, right? It's not just for large corporates.
Right.
But really to create an environment for these leaders to make them self-aware of what they are not, maybe certain skills that they are not adopting today, and ways to show up in front of their team or the wider board, their leadership team, and how to be truly of service to others, because that's what a good leader is. And that's the difference between a leader and a boss.
Right. That is so true.
Yeah.
Right. That is so beautiful. Can you touch upon and elaborate on that? This is so important, is that there is such a big difference between a boss and a leader. And I'm sure you've worked with all personalities so far, the boss and the leader. I think the boss brings in a lot of ego, if I can say that, and I might be wrong, and I think you can help me obviously elaborate on that. And a leader brings in a world of emotional intelligence, support, maybe a little bit of ego. You're going to help me define that. But really, what is that difference between the boss and the leader?
It's a good question. So the boss is really a lot more deliverable focused. So it's a lot about, here are the priorities and here's how we're going to be executing against them. A leader really spends a lot more of their time to be very considerate of what kind of culture do I want to set within this organization and within my team.
Yeah.
Right? And how do I want people to show up for each other?
Right.
How do I want to show up for my team? I believe in what we call servant leadership, and really to be, as a servant leader, it's all about the team and others and the stakeholders around you. Right. It's about making them successful. And then, allowing them, giving them the space and the tools and the techniques in order to be able to do that. And so you're very much more consumed, I would say, with the culture that you set for those that are relying on you, how you show up, and really modeling a certain type of behavior, because you can have a lot of bosses in an organization.
Absolutely.
And they could be not proactively contributing to a positive work culture.
Absolutely.
And be very just action deliverable focused, right? It's very, very important. And I always say, culture happens really from the top down.
Yeah.
And so the responsibility does fall on leaders to set that culture.
Right.
It's, it starts from there.
Right. I'm going to ask you this to dig a little bit deeper into that. We talked about 2 decades of you being in the tech space, super fast-paced, high pressure, intense, and then you found your calling. If we were to rewind, today, Diana, the executive leadership coach that I'm sitting with, I'd love to ask you, did you have a bad boss or bosses? And were they the trigger to you bringing that transformative journey into your calling?
I love that question, because I think it's very important to talk about this, because I am not the only one who's experienced this, and there's many people out there who are experiencing this every single day. I absolutely have experienced a bad boss in my, I would say, first younger professional life.
Right.
I didn't know back then how to define what a bad boss is, but I knew that didn't feel right. And it was very hard, again, really just to articulate what was wrong here.
Right.
And also to challenge that way of leadership.
Right.
Because, in the coaching world, we say, if you're all about high tell, you're just about telling people what to do, right? Then you're more of a dictator than a leader.
I love that. All right.
That's the reality, right? And so, and we still see that happening a lot today,
all the
right?
time,
especially maybe with like older leaderships, and so leadership that hasn't been exposed to, I think, the world of bettering yourself as a leader.
Right.
And if we take it back, many decades ago, no one even spoke about coaching back in the day. That wasn't part of the workplace. I mean, not even 20 years ago, 18 years ago when I went into the workspace, there was no habit of asking you for your opinion, of having a seat at the table, of being provided with context of why we're doing certain things.
Right.
Right. And then as a woman in sort of the Middle Eastern space, being around a more of a male-dominated leadership environment, and I'm going to bring it back to me, I realized that I was really showing up in a way where, you know what, I could have, if I only knew back then of the power of coaching and self-development and developing others, I would have named it, and I would have in the moment really probably challenged it even more.
Right.
That bad leadership that I was exposed to.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Injustice, people around feeling like scared that they're going to lose their job the next day.
Right.
So,
Not
there's
being
so many
able
examples.
to voice your opinion as an employee probably is one of those as well. And I think that's the majority of what a lot of employees go through.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly where I want to go to with you, which is when you've, and I'm just going to take this back because I did mention that you are UC Berkeley certified, which is a global, super well-known, credible community worldwide. And you must have met and worked with a lot of very high-end global leaders that just went into the program, got coached and certified just like you did, which is so beautiful to begin with.
Yeah.
And so I would love to know, with all honesty and in your experience, can every leader be coached and fixed? I need to say the word fixed because I think it's really important for everyone who's watching us today, who's really struggling with leadership in one way or another, and is looking at this as a sign of hope, thinking, is there, can my boss, my leader be coached? Can they be fixed? Can they do something about themselves? So the answer lies with you.
Can everyone be fixed and coached? The answer, unfortunately, is no. And so when I went through the Berkeley program, I really wanted to believe that everybody can be coached. But it comes down to one very simple thing. If you want to change, and if you're open to receiving that feedback and to that development plan, that way of adopting certain techniques, then that is it.
Right.
Then that is it. Then you are really on the right track. But there are leaders who don't want to be coached.
Right.
And who do not believe, taking it back to self-awareness, who do not believe that anything is wrong with them.
Absolutely.
Or in the way that they show up, or in the way that they lead.
Right.
And so I would say if someone has had the privilege to be exposed to leadership coaching,
Right.
and has chosen to really benefit from that and take the value from that, amazing. Because it's a lifelong journey.
Right.
I am a certified coach. I have a coach coaching the coach, right? We all have that.
Okay, so, right. I love that you brought this up because I want to make this about you because I want people to know and viewers to know that, you always find hope through one coach or another who will give you one advice or another on how to be a better leader, how to fix your leader, and whatnot. But Diana, the mother of two, who is a workaholic in the tech space for 2 decades. I also know that you are an adventurous and, you love adventure by nature. So I think you have your plate very full.
Yeah.
Who coaches Diana today?
It takes a village, to be honest with you, because it's ongoing work. I have a wonderful executive coach who's based in Washington, actually. So it's not in the region here. And I get to speak to her every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the urgency of what it is that I really want to, sort of fine tune and work through more. But I believe in a combination of coaching and form of healing or therapy, because coaching is not therapy. That's very important to mention. Right. Coaching is all about forward looking, all about dealing with the reality of today. It's very action oriented. It's about making progress. And whereas therapy is a lot about sort of, dealing with certain situations and issues of the past. I believe that if you marry those two together, it's beautiful.
It's absolutely beautiful.
I do that, right? Been doing that, I think, for about maybe a couple of years now, not too long. But what you work on with your coach, when you come across, if you want to bring certain change to your life and you come across certain self-limiting beliefs, your coach can definitely help you with that.
Right.
But if they're very deep-rooted and they come from a pattern of behavior that you carry with you from the past, you might want to speak to somebody who goes more into the deep psychology of why you are behaving that way or bringing those patterns still into your reality today.
Right.
So that is my go-to, right? I do a combination of both. I will always want to continue to have an executive coach work with me. And, my executive coach has an executive coach coaching her.
Right.
Because if you think about it, we also need space. If you're in a leadership role, and even if you are a certified coach, you want to have the space, the safe space to be able to show up in a way where you can talk about all your challenges.
Right.
Right. And so as transparent as I am in the workplace with my team and very open, and I really believe in compassionate leadership, there are certain things that I face in the workplace, challenges, obstacles, I don't necessarily want to bring to my team.
Absolutely.
Because I don't want to maybe burden them.
Yes.
Right. And so, and I might not want to bring it to my leadership team who's based in London or the US.
Right.
I would like a third party who's not attached and not biased.
Right.
To the outcome, who's not going to come and tell me, well, ultimately, regardless of what you're facing, you're going to have to make your number, or you're going to, I run the sales organization.
Right.
And so having that space on an ongoing basis, I think is really, really important.
Right.
It clears your head. You go back into the workspace. You continue to feel more empowered in terms of, I have all of these things pulling at me. I'm going to focus on this one thing, and I'm going to bring it to my leadership team in a way that they will listen. I've had the time to structure my thoughts.
Right.
How to do, right, when you run a really busy schedule.
Right.
So, it works for me. I see it working for a lot of successful coaches that are based, around the world.
Yeah.
So
I find that so beautiful, because I think for anybody who's watching you and has obviously now heard about your journey and what how you got to where you are, I want you to please emphasize on the fact that as a leader, no matter what your position and title is, no matter how many people you have under you, no matter how big the organization is that you're running, please, can you emphasize on the fact that getting coached as a leader is okay?
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely, it's okay. Because we are all a work in progress. And if you think, I've had the privilege to work with some wonderful leaders over the last couple of years and continue, especially through the Berkeley program, because that's a community that I stay very close to.
Right.
And you are never going to be 100% complete in what you can learn.
I love
and
that.
how you can develop, because life is all about, as you're changing and evolving, you will encounter new challenges.
Right.
Right. And you can have the technique to help yourself sort of, structure whatever you're going through in your head, but having somebody external who is really purely there to hold the space for you, just to hold the space for you and for you to be able, you can trust them. They have no sort of skin or stake in the business that you're running or what you're going through, and they're just really there to help you and provide you with the technique and the modalities for you to be able to work through it.
Right.
So I think it's absolutely critical in today's world, because too fast-paced, there's a lot of pressure on leaders. And this is why I said earlier, I'd be very careful maybe to call it bad leadership versus bad leaders.
Right.
Because we do have to also, recognize that leaders go through a lot. And if they are not given the space to offload what their challenges are and what their problems are, I mean, they will be depleted of energy, right? And they will not recognize that they're showing up with certain patterns in front of their team. It is a huge responsibility to be a leader, because over time and time again, and through conversation with whether it's my team or, you know, sort of the extended industry, when people don't have the opportunity to speak in a safe environment, they start detaching.
Absolutely.
You start facing burnout.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you start feeling negative emotions towards your job. And that doesn't just happen to your team members. It happens to leaders too.
Right.
They just are probably not as comfortable speaking about it. So they do require that space in order to be able to do that.
Right.
Right? The other thing that's not easy for a leader to do is say, you know what, I'm in this leadership role. I can be VP, I can be a CEO, I can be a C-level. I'm not good at this one thing. They're not comfortable saying that.
Right.
And that's understandable.
Right.
Right? I don't see that as a weakness, for sure. But then again, to have a coach available to you that you can speak to who's not attached to any outcome. This coach it doesn't matter to this coach whether you're going to meet your quotas, how much revenue or sales you're going to make. What matters to the coach is that they help develop you to be the best version that you can be in the workplace, the best leader that you can be in the workplace.
Right. I always say a good leader, regardless of the fact that we all need to self-develop, exactly like you rightfully mentioned. And you opened up my eyes to the fact when you said that, you know, each one of us, including you, who is an executive leadership coach, needs constant, ongoing polishing and self-development. And I find this so important because this is a true message to all of the leaders out there that I know, that you know, that we don't know, that are watching us, that we all need a little bit of polishing every once in a while, every few weeks, every few months. It's an ongoing process, like you rightfully mentioned. And I think when we look back in your journey as Diana, who is an executive leadership coach today, is it really necessary for everyone today who is new in the role or has been sitting in the role for a long time and is a bit older of age to continue being coached?
Absolutely. I think coaching is for everyone.
Right.
It's for everyone. And we're talking about executive coaching, but you know what? You can't distinguish those. You cannot separate executive coaching from life coaching.
Right.
Because when you develop yourself as a full person.
True.
You become a better sort of family member, father, mother, sister, brother, friend, right? In every way, because it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right? When you work on that. So it is, you know, if I go back, my own experience, 20 years ago, I would have loved to have what we consider a coach today by my side.
Absolutely.
Didn't exist back in the day.
Absolutely.
I mean, at least not in this region. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't think it was brought to my attention at any point. And so you're growing up as this young, maybe fresh grad. You can be in your early 20s, and then you move on to be in your early 30s. And little do you know, you're in your 40s, and you've never really had someone by your side other than a boss.
Right.
Right? Who creates a space for you to see things from different eyes.
Right.
And so everyone will need that. Like, you can be a fresh grad. Imagine, and I've seen this, right? I mean, we interview, fresh grads or sort of young professionals coming into the workplace, and you can see that there's a level of anxiety in terms of, oh my God, I have to learn so much in order to be able to add value.
Right.
Right? So what happens if you just leave them to feel this way, day in and day out, and day in and day out? As a leader, it's your responsibility to help spot that.
Right.
That anxiety, that need to want to be seen,
Right.
be heard, be included. That's the job of a leader.
Right.
Right? And not everyone has the privilege to be surrounded with team members. You might have a great team, and I've experienced this myself, but not everybody's comfortable speaking up if they see not the best leadership behaviors displayed in front of them.
Absolutely.
So it's for everyone. It's for everyone fresh grad, someone in sort of mid-level career, leader, there is, if you think about it, you wake up in the morning and not a single week goes by where you haven't encountered a challenge in the workplace.
Absolutely.
It's impossible.
Absolutely.
It can be something very small,
Or
it can be
something very
frustration,
big.
it can be something really big,
So
it can be
true.
a big decision. And so having somebody by your side that you can speak to,
I
again,
love that.
without judgment and who's not attached to the outcome.
Right.
That was one of the biggest learnings for me, is that there's a difference between coaching my team within the corporate organization that I'm, leading, and coaching somebody externally
Right.
to my team. And I'm going to have to put it out there, because coaching someone within my team, it's a sales organization. I'm attached to the outcome. I'm attached to, I want you to make your number. I want you to, ideally, right? I would like, and that's what I consider sales coaching. It's very different from
Absolutely.
executive coaching.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
What has executive leadership coaching done to Diana and her life and her space and her organization? I'm sure you've had a lot of aha moments when you started with the program prior to getting certified, all the way up until today. What has it done to you?
It's changed the course or the trajectory of my entire career. Really, really. And I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but there's a lot to say about this. But I'll take it back to what we started talking about at the beginning. My wonderful leader that I met 6 years ago, who was my manager for a long time, when she introduced me to the world of coaching, I thought I was successful, which I was, like, if you put it on textbook. And I thought I was showing up with all the right behaviors and sort of leadership traits that were needed. But she really opened my eyes to, actually, if you're going to keep bringing in certain patterns of not delegating, not showing your team your full authentic self.
Right.
I have moments where I have a tough day.
We all do.
Exactly. We all have those, right?
Yeah.
And so what I recognized before being properly sort of introduced to the world of coaching is that I was never mentioning that I was having a tough day.
Wow.
I never was comfortable and, saying anything to my team. So I would always sort of, composure is it's a virtue.
Key. Right. It's
and
a virtue.
Important.
Yeah.
But not to the extent where you're being almost robotic, in the sense that people don't know. And I've had team members from my team asking me, how do you keep it together every single day? Like, how do you, in the worst of times and the toughest pressure, we don't see you ever struggling. And so that's not a good thing.
Right.
That's not a good thing.
Agreed.
And so what my, manager did back in the day is she opened my eyes to that. And she said to me, do you recognize, if you don't show your team that you're having a bad day and that you're keeping it together, you're creating a culture where there is an expectation of everybody else to always pretend that they have it together.
Right.
You don't want to do that. That's a lot of pressure.
Right.
Because, people deal with pressure in different ways. And so it's transformed my career in so many ways. I really decided to show up very authentically with my full authentic self.
Right.
I'm having a bad day. That's okay. You know what? If I'm now running a team meeting, I'm going to say it. You know what, guys? I had a tough morning this morning. And, we can bring some humor. Humor is really important. We can bring some humor into it. And it just makes you so much more approachable. And, I've had and I'm going to double down on this specifically. I've had young moms in my team who really were very worried about coming back from maternity leave because they didn't want to be seen in a certain way and they didn't want to be excluded from certain opportunities in the workspace. And because I went through that, I'm very intentional about not creating that environment for the team.
I love that.
And really making sure is that is not a step back in your career.
I love that.
And so I've transformed and sort of evolved in so many different ways, being your full authentic self and truly listening. Listen to what the person is trying to tell you, like, don't give up on people, right? Don't give up on people, because you don't know what someone is struggling with at home and what they're bringing into the workspace. You spend more time with the people that you work with than your family.
Right.
I would say
Absolutely.
probably 80% of your time.
I always say that. I always tell my colleagues at work all the time, guys, I spend more time with you that I'm spending at home with my family
Yeah.
or even with myself,
Yes.
right?
That's true.
Because it is
Yeah.
from Monday to Friday,
Yeah.
morning to sometimes evening, if not nighttime. So, we spend a lot of time together. Now imagine that in a bad culture.
Yes. Yes. And so bringing it back really to your question is that I've learned to be my full authentic self. I've learned to give feedback when feedback is due, right? Whether it is to my leadership team, whether it's to members on my team, I've learned to spot behaviors that are unacceptable in the workplace and that are just going to drag down team culture rather than build team culture. And so that's a muscle that you need to build.
Absolutely.
To take somebody to the side and tell them, I've just observed the way that you're showing up, and here is the impact that you're having on other people around you. And I think what a lot of leaders hold on to in the workspace is, that was not my intention.
Right.
That's okay. Like, that was not your intention, but you know what? Your intention doesn't matter because the impact is more important than the intention.
I love that.
Right? And so you can get away with anything if you say that was not my intention.
Right.
Right? I can show up in a certain way. I'm just going to put it on myself rather than putting it on someone else in a team meeting, and I can lash out.
Right.
That's not okay as a leader.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Right? It
Right.
creates a lack of trust. It creates inconsistency. And when you don't have your team's trust, you do not have a leadership role.
Right.
Going back to the boss
And when you
versus-
run your team in fear, you also don't have a
Yes.
leadership role. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I can feel
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
there are certain
It's so important because so many people and apologies that I'm bringing these things out
No.
here, but there are so many individuals I sit with day in and day out from different corporate worlds, different industries, different companies that have many different stories. Gladly, I don't have those, but really that tell me, but I've had those experiences.
Yeah.
I can tell you about bad bosses I've had.
Yes.
Right? And I always try to make this about me as well.
Yeah.
I've had bosses that would bully me and the team. I've had bosses that brought in the worst, most stressful, toxic culture into the workplace. I've seen those. And I don't think they ever would accept being coached. So I walked away.
Yeah.
And that's how you lose employees.
That's what many people do. And so in the majority of the cases, when someone leaves an organization, it's because they've had a bad boss.
Right.
That is the number one reason
Right.
why you leave. That's the number one reason. There's a study around it, right? We also know that recently there was a study done by Deloitte. 80% of people globally consider themselves burnt out today.
Right.
80%. That's a real pandemic. That is a pandemic.
That is scary.
Right.
That is a scary number.
And so who's responsible for taking care of those people's well-being?
Right.
You gave me the example of, bullying. Yes, I believe you because that happens.
Right.
It happens. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced it as well. That is just totally unacceptable. And it's really those types of individuals who will benefit the most from, again, self-awareness, from feedback.
Right.
Feedback. Who's going to hold this person accountable who's in a leadership role? You cannot do that. You cannot send your team home with anxiety, with the feeling of, am I going to lose my job because I didn't say a certain thing that I should say, or I didn't behave in a certain way that this difficult leader is expecting me, to
Right.
behave in. And so it's not okay to send people home as a leader every day with that level of fear and anxiety. Like, you are responsible for sending them home in a way where they can say, you know what, I'm well enough to cope with the workload, right? Because it's not easy. I'm not saying that, we all have workload, we all have certain responsibilities and priorities we have to deliver at. But now imagine you do that in a culture, right? That is supportive, where you're heard, where you're seen, where you can come in the next day and say, you know what, last night I worked really late.
Right.
And this shouldn't be a repetitive thing.
Right.
And your leader is there listening to you and telling you, okay, so how can I help you?
Right.
That's servant leadership.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Versus a boss might not want to hear it and would, it's just like, keep that away from me.
Or says counter arguments such as, and I've had that happen to me to a boss I've had 3.5, 4 years ago, when I would be constantly working till approximately, no joke, 1 or 2 in the morning every single day. And that was during the pandemic as well. And when I brought this up, he said, but that's what we brought you in for, right? So, as happy as I am that we're having this conversation right now, I hope he's listening and watching this and thinking, I can resonate that. I should get some help. I should get coached.
Absolutely. I think the first step is this specific individual. I wonder how this person is actually doing today and whether they had the opportunity to be exposed, to the world of coaching.
Yeah.
But if you are watching this and you are in a leadership role today, you're a manager, even if it's just a small team, the moment that you have somebody to your left and to your right that you're managing that are looking at you, you're a leader. You're a leader. It can be just one person.
Right.
Or 2 people that are counting on you, that you are sort of moving, forward, that you're leading. That is, it doesn't stop at just being a privilege. That is the responsibility. It's a duty. And really, it's very important to check in with, the individuals on your team and see how are they really, really doing. By the way, and I use that a lot, is that there's a difference between how are you doing today? No, I'm good. We all say that, I'm good. And then we move on. How are you really, really doing today?
That is beautiful, right?
And if you say that to someone who is in your team and you're their leader, they immediately feel heard. They immediately feel that you're creating the space for them to be able to come and tell you know what? I'm good, but I'm struggling with this.
Right.
It's very different. Just how are you, doing
I can
today?
relate to that.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
It takes sometimes just those small little tweaks of how you show up and how you create the space.
Right.
And to let people know that it's okay. It's like, we all need to vent.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so vent with a constructive mindset and like with a solution-oriented mindset. Absolutely. That's okay. Right? Here's a problem that I have and here's what I think we should do about it. That's it.
I love that.
Let's create that space and talk about that. As a leader, create that space.
Right.
You're going to want to listen and hear and ask deeper questions of what's going on here. Like, how can I help?
Right. What's your plan and your ambition as an executive leadership coach for the next, I don't like to say 5 years. I think I always say it's a bit far-fetched, but maybe for the next 2.5, 3 years. What is your ultimate ambition? What's your ultimate goal?
For me, the way that I look at coaching is that it is, my ultimate goal. I spoke about developing other people, but I really have this vision and already putting that into practice today of transforming the way that my coachees or my clients, we call them coachees as well, change the way that they participate in their own lives.
Right.
Right? Change the way you participate in your life. Change the way that you participate in how you show up as a leader, in the way that you participate in your personal life. And so to be able to give them the tools to transform in the way that they just show up for everyone around them and themselves. And the more, individuals I can do this with, the better.
Right.
Right. And that's why I went into the space, because there's a fine line between, you have to run a business and you have to run an organization, and ultimately, it's all revenue driven. But the more space I can create for myself, for certain individuals around me that are relying on me in the next couple of years, and really just be of value to them. For me, having one coaching conversation and that individual walking out telling me, thank you, you really helped me with this. I'm going to take action 1, 2, 3. I feel more empowered. I've built more confidence, right?
Right.
That's ultimately the goal, is just for them to give them the space to be able to be, live their full potential in their professional lives and their personal lives.
Beautiful. Let me ask you, and I think it's really important for people who are watching and potentially may want to reach out to you, or get coached, maybe not necessarily from you or from another program, you name it. You're very young. But as an executive leadership coach, you may be coaching people that are, and no intent with that, but 30 years, 40 years older.
Yes.
Does age make a difference? Does experience make a difference in that?
It's a really good question. I always say, you know what? If you're young and you're a leader and you're a lung leadership coach, you have to get out of your head. Then get the number out of your head. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Right.
Beautiful.
Because it truly doesn't. Because when I'm coaching somebody, it's not about me in the session. It's about my ability, obviously, to coach and to bring the right modalities and the right sort of techniques into the session. And it doesn't matter who I am today, the team that I lead, how big my organization is. None of this matters because in a coaching session, it's not about me. I lower my self-orientation and I pay attention to, I don't ever insert myself in, because then I become a mentor.
Right.
There's a difference.
Right.
Right. And so as a coach, and I've had some inspiring moments. So, I've coached somebody who was, who's a child neurologist and a brain surgeon and has been very successful in that field for over 30 years.
Right.
Very
different industry.
Very different industry.
Interesting.
Right. And brought in a very specific work problem to coach through. It didn't matter that I was, 20, 30 years younger than this person. What mattered is that this person is not an executive coach, has never been exposed to coaching, was actually very sort of nervous coming into the session. And it was really interesting for me to see, right? We're from totally different fields, different age group, different parts of the world, based in the States and based here. And we had a wonderful session.
Right.
So I would say you have to get out of your head. If you're a young leadership coach, you're certified, you've gone through the proper programs and so on, and you've had, your practical, obviously, experience with a number of people around you, it doesn't matter. Your age doesn't matter.
Right. Did COVID speed up? I want to be careful how I phrase this, but really, this is the real pandemic of today, burnout, right? As you rightfully mentioned. But did COVID speed up bad leadership, if I can say that? Or did it speed up the pressure of having to deliver for an organization?
I think bad leadership was always around.
Right.
And is still around.
True.
I think what sort of COVID specifically did is that all of a sudden, all these huge organizations, even small to medium businesses had to learn how to manage people remotely.
Right.
Right? How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you manage people remotely, right? And so I think that was probably the biggest challenge. It's something I faced personally, like, being in the office every single day and all of a sudden, my team is not around me. How do I lead them?
Right.
And so did, some leaders excel at this? Yeah, I think we all struggled as if you're in a leadership role. And did some of them fall behind? Yes.
Right.
Definitely. And so again, if you're in a position where in COVID you struggled because you all of a sudden went from having your team around you and you've had that interaction with them, and all of a sudden, you're leading people for, 10 months. Some organization went on for 2 years.
Right.
Working remotely.
Right.
It definitely created an additional burden for leaders, and I think an opportunity for leaders to reflect even deeper and think about, okay, now I need a new way of, sort of leading individuals. I need a new way of finding out, like, how am I going to lead people that are not necessarily, they're not next to me.
Right.
Trust.
Right.
Trusts.
That's
right?
beautiful.
Yeah.
So before we end the episode, I'd love to be talking about this for hours because it felt like a minute. And I know for a fact, every single person who is watching us today or gets to see the episode at a much later stage is going to relate this back to their leaders or is going to relate it back to themselves because they are in a leadership role or they're up for a leadership role. You name it. What are the big 3 words of advice that you really want to give the leaders of today whilst their teams are listening to this episode?
Only 3 words? Yeah.
3 words, 3 words of advice.
Yeah.
3 phrases, you name it.
This probably needs its own session, but I would say pause if you are listening and you've heard this conversation today, pause for a moment and really reflect on the intent that you're having today as a leader versus the impact. That's very, very important.
Wow.
Truly be honest with yourself, and maybe speak to somebody that is outside of your organization. Speak to a friend, speak to a family member, someone who doesn't have a stake in the organization, and just reflect for a moment and articulate sort of to yourself in terms of, how am I showing up today? Am I creating trust? Am I
Wow.
listening? Am I holding space? Am I truly checking in with my team? Am I of service? Am I asking my team, how can I help?
Right.
Rather than just tell, you know, deliverables. Just ask yourself those questions, just, you know, to start with. And then if you do see that there's an opportunity for improvement, for development, for change, really think about sort of what is it that you want to maybe double down on.
Right.
Because it can be so many things for different people, right?
Right.
Again, there's no one leadership coaching session that is a copy paste from the one prior. Like
Right.
you know, you have to custom tailor them to the individual.
Right.
And so I would definitely say pause and reflect.
Right.
And truly think about, how are you showing up today? And the most important thing is, think of the trust equation. Think of, do people around me trust me
Right.
as a leader? And if you can be very honest with yourself and say, you know what, I'm not sure, then there is an opportunity for improvement. And, you know, there is no leadership position, there's no leadership role without trust.
Absolutely.
It doesn't. You cannot be a leader if your team doesn't trust you. You'll be a
Right.
boss, you'll be a manager, you won't be, you know, a servant leader, which is what leadership is really all about.
Right. That's been such a beautiful session. And I would love to honestly end it by telling you that we'll be having another episode soon, I think, where we just need to talk about the modalities. Because as you were talking through the episode today,
Yeah.
there's so many things I was able to reflect on in my head, experiences, friends I've heard of, you know, encounters I've seen with good leaders, bad leaders, you name it. And I think it's so important that we just talk about modalities
Yeah.
in an upcoming episode that I think will be very important to shed light
Yeah.
on. So that if someone is refusing to get coached right now, that maybe they can pick up on those modalities from the session.
Beautiful.
And really take it from there. I
Yes.
want to really thank you, first of all, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is my first time that I'm actually exposed and get to sit with an executive leadership coach. I've read a lot about the program worldwide, but it's the first time that really here in this market or in this region, I'm sitting with someone who talks about this so openly and really addresses, in some cases, the elephant in the room as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
I
you for
really
having me.
appreciate the openness, the transparency. I can only imagine that a lot of the, you know, people and individuals that have worked with you as you were developing yourself must have been really, really lucky. And I think it's so important that we continue to develop ourselves. You know, I'm not just, you know, giving a lecture out there, but I think
Yeah.
it's just about myself, yourself, everyone else who's watching. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
It's
me.
been
Yeah.
such a pleasure having you and listening
Yeah.
to this conversation. I could have had another hour easily,
Yeah.
but truly appreciate
And
that.
for creating the space really to you to be able to talk about this, because we do not talk about it enough. We don't
Right.
talk about it enough.
Right.
So looking forward to part 2.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.